There is a sound that every civilization has, a baseline frequency beneath the clamor of the marketplace and the pronouncements of its leaders. In Rome, you might imagine it as the distant, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer against an anvil, the low rumble of iron-rimmed cartwheels on ancient basalt flagstones, the constant, flowing murmur of Latin, spoken in 1,000 different accents from Syria to Spain, all converging in the heart of the world. But beneath all of that, there is another sound, a darker hum. It is the sound of a system maintaining itself, the sound of order being enforced with an iron will. It is the sound of justice, or what one of the most complex societies in history called justice, in its most absolute, most symbolic, and most terrifying form. We often think of Roman punishment, and our minds immediately conjure images of the Colosseum. The roar of the crowd, the glint of sun on a gladiator's helmet, the shadow of the lion emerging from the gate. We think of crucifixion, that brutal, efficient method of public execution designed for slaves and rebels, a warning staked out along the empire's endless roads. And while these are stark and brutal facets of their history, they are, in many ways, a simple brutality. They are exercises in raw power, the state demonstrating its dominion over life and death in a grand, theatrical, and terrifyingly public forum. It is power made manifest. But there are layers to the Roman concept of justice, layers that go far deeper than the blood-soaked sand of the arena. There are punishments reserved not for the enemies of the state, not for the rebellious slave, not for the common thief or murderer. There are punishments conceived for those who commit a crime so foul, so fundamentally unnatural, that it was believed to threaten the very fabric of Roman identity, to poison the soil and anger the gods. A crime that wasn't just illegal but was a sacrilege. This is a story about one such punishment. A punishment so bizarre, so meticulously crafted, so laden with grotesque and potent symbolism, that it feels less like a legal sentence from a code of laws, and more like a dark ritual dredged up from the most ancient primal fears of a people. It is a punishment that seeks not merely to end a life, but to erase a soul from existence, to deny it earth, to deny it air, to deny it a final resting place, and to condemn it to an eternity of forgotten chaos. A punishment that involves a heavy leather sack, a dog, a rooster, a snake, and a monkey. This is the story of the Poena Cullei, the punishment of the sack. To even begin to understand it, to grasp why a society as sophisticated and pragmatic as Rome would devise such a nightmarish ceremony, you must first understand the crime it was designed to avenge. That crime was parricidium, parricide, in its narrowest sense, the murder of one's own father. By extension, it came to encompass the killing of other close ascendant relatives, a grandfather, sometimes a mother, even a patron who stood in for a father. In the 21st century, our legal systems, for the most part, hold that murder is murder. The act of unlawfully taking a human life is the ultimate transgression, and the identity of the victim, while emotionally significant, does not typically create an entirely separate category of homicide with its own unique, ritualized form of execution. But for the Romans, this was absolutely not the case. The murder of a stranger was a crime, a homicidium. The murder of one's own father was a celus, a profound religious and cosmic monstrosity. To comprehend this chasm in their thinking, we must peel back the layers of Roman society and look at its core atom, its foundational building block, the familia. And at the heart of every Roman familia stood a figure of almost absolute, divinely sanctioned power, the paterfamilias. The very word, paterfamilias, father of the family, fails to capture the sheer weight of its meaning in English. He was not just a dad. He was the head of the household, the oldest living male, and his authority, the patria potestas power of the father, was nearly boundless by law and by sacred tradition, the mos maiorum, the ways of the ancestors. He held, in principle if not always in common practice, the vitae nascisque potestas power of life and death over every single person within his household. And the Roman household, the familia, was not just his wife and children. It was his sons' wives, his grandchildren, the family slaves, the freedmen who still owed him duty, and all the property, land, and wealth accumulated by any of them. Imagine this for a moment. You are a 40-year-old Roman man. You are a decorated centurion who has fought in Gaul. You are married with 3 children of your own. You are respected in your community. But if your father, the paterfamilias, is still alive, you are legally a dependent. You own nothing in your own name. The salary you earn, the spoils of war you bring home, the small farm you work, it all belongs to him. He must approve your marriage. He can, in theory, dissolve your marriage. He can, in theory, sell you into slavery across the Tiber. And in the most extreme interpretation of ancient law, he could, after a family council, order your execution. This structure was not seen as tyranny. It was seen as the natural order. It was the bedrock of the Roman state itself. The state, the residential publica, was viewed as an extension, a macrocosm of the family. The absolute loyalty, the discipline, the unquestioning obedience a son owed his father was the very model for the loyalty and obedience a citizen owed to the magistrates, the Senate, and to Rome itself. The paterfamilias was not just a man. He was an institution. He was the living link in a sacred chain stretching back to the mythical founders of Rome, back to the ancestors whose wax masks, the imagines, were kept in a special cabinet in the home. He was the guardian of the family hearth, the chief priest of its domestic rites, the embodiment of order, tradition, and continuity. So, what happens when that sacred order is not just broken, but violently and horrifically inverted? What happens when the son, the legal subject, the one who owes everything he is to his father, rises up and strikes down the father, the sovereign, the source of his own life? In the Roman mind, this act was a pollution, a deep, indelible stain, a silus that contaminated not only the killer but the very ground he walked on. It was a declaration of war against the gods. It was a betrayal of every ancestor who had come before. It was an act of high treason against the natural, divine order of the universe. Parricide, therefore, was no longer truly human. He had, by his own hand, made himself into something other, a monster who had severed the most sacred bond known to man. And for such a monstrous crime, a simple, clean execution would be a mercy. It would be insufficient. A sword to the neck, a length of rope, even the agony of the cross, these were punishments for men. The parricide needed a punishment that reflected the unnatural horror of his deed. He needed to be expunged from the world in a way that mirrored his own violation of nature. He needed to be unmade. And so, the jurists and priests of Rome, over centuries, perfected the dark legal poetry of the Poena Cullei. Let us walk through this ritual, this piece of state-sanctioned psychological theater. Every step, every object, every action is pregnant with symbolic meaning, designed to methodically strip the condemned man of his humanity before extinguishing his life. Once a man was tried and convicted of parricide, the ceremony of his unmaking would begin. The first step was to sever his connection to the visual world. His head was veiled, or often covered with a bag made from a wolf's hide. The symbolism here is immediate and multi-layered. His face, the seat of his identity, is erased. He is rendered anonymous, a thing, not a person. But more importantly, from a religious standpoint, his gaze is now considered toxic. The sight of a parricide, a being so profoundly polluted, was believed to be so contaminating that it could blight the crops, sour the wine, and bring terrible misfortune upon any person, any animal, any part of the land his eyes fell upon. He must be blinded to the world, and the world must be shielded from him. He is already being separated from the community of the living, His senses turned inward to the darkness that now defines him. The choice of a wolf's hide is likely no accident. The wolf, to the Romans, was a creature of duality. The she-wolf was the sacred foster mother of Romulus and Remus, the founders of their race, but the wild wolf was also a symbol of feral, untamed nature, an outlaw living outside the bounds of human society. The parasite, like the wolf, was now an outlaw of the human species. Next, his body would be beaten, not with ordinary rods, but with virgae sanguina blood-colored or blood-red rods. This was not just a physical punishment to inflict pain, though it certainly did that. It was a ritual scourging. The red color evoked the blood he had spilled, and the whipping itself was a desperate, violent attempt at purification, to scourge the monumental sin from his flesh before the final act of disposal. It was a physical manifestation of society's revulsion. Then came his footwear. He was not permitted to walk barefoot or in his own sandals to the place of his doom. He was forced to wear soli ligni, crude wooden clogs or shoes. The logic is chillingly consistent. His feet, having walked the earth as a parasite, were now considered unclean. They were forbidden from making direct contact with the sacred soil of Rome or any land on his final journey. He was being insulated, lifted, separated from the very ground, the terra mater, the earth mother that gave his people life and would receive their bodies in death. Step by excruciating step, he is being methodically severed from every element that constitutes a Roman life. His identity, the veiled face, his physical integrity, the whipping, and his connection to the land, the wooden shoes. And then the centerpiece of the whole grotesque affair, the sack, the culleus. This was not just any bag. It was an enormous, heavy sack made of oxhide, a material chosen for its immense strength and for being watertight. The ox was a symbol of agriculture, of sacrifice, of civilization's triumph over nature. This sack, made from its hide, was to be the parasite's tomb, his coffin, and his vessel to oblivion. It was an anti-womb. He emerged into the world from his mother. He would exit it from this dark, leathery prison. He would be commanded or forced to climb inside, but he would not be alone. The darkness would not be his only companion. Forced into that claustrophobic, suffocating space with him was a bizarre and terrifying menagerie. The law, as it was eventually codified by the Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century AD, specified 4 very particular companions for his final journey: a dog, a rooster, a snake, and a monkey. Imagine it. The man, already beaten, humiliated, and disoriented, is thrust into the foul-smelling darkness of the sack. Then, one by one, the animals are thrown in with him. The frantic scrambling of the dog, the panicked flapping and crowing of the rooster, the sinuous, cold slithering of the snake, the shrieking, chattering terror of the monkey. The heavy leather is then pulled tight, and the opening is sewn shut with thick, strong thread. There is no light. The air is immediately hot and foul. There is only a chaos of sound, smell, and frantic movement. The sealed sack was then placed on a cart and driven, in a grim procession, to the nearest deep body of water, the sea, if it was near, or a flowing river like the mighty Tiber. There, before a silent, watching crowd, the sack and its living, struggling contents were heaved into the water. There was to be no escape. The sheer weight of the sack and its occupants would ensure it sank quickly. The final moments of the condemned would be a chaotic, multisensory nightmare. The desperate struggle for air, the rising water seeping through the seams, and the frenzied, panicked animals tearing, biting, and scratching in the absolute darkness, driven mad by fear and the lack of oxygen. The parasite would die not by a clean stroke of a sword, but by a horrifying, ignominious combination of suffocation, drowning, and being torn apart by panicked beasts. And crucially, the punishment didn't end with death. Its design was to ensure his body would never be recovered, carried away by the current or sinking to the bottom of the sea. By this, he was denied a burial. For a Roman, this was a fate almost worse than death itself. A proper burial, with the correct rites, was essential for the spirit of the deceased, the manes, to find peace and enter the underworld. Without a tomb, without offerings, his spirit was doomed to wander the earth eternally as a restless, malevolent ghost, a larva, forever denied entry into the world of the dead, just as he had been cast out of the world of the living. This was not just an execution, it was a metaphysical annihilation, a symbolic punishment of the highest and most terrible order. The true, dark genius of the Poena Cullei lies in this intricate, horrifying symbolism. It is a legal poem written in blood, leather, and terror. To truly understand the mind of Roman law in this context, we must become decoders. We must put ourselves in the sandals of a Roman citizen watching this spectacle and ask, why these specific animals? Each one was a carefully chosen symbol, a living, breathing indictment of the crime that had been committed. Each was a shard of the natural and social world that the parricide had shattered. Let us begin our dissection of this unholy menagerie with the dog. The dog, in Roman culture as in so many others, was a potent symbol of loyalty, fidelity, and guardianship. The famous cave canem mosaics, "Beware of the Dog," found at the entrances to Pompeian homes were not just a practical warning. They were a statement about the protected, sacred space of the household. The dog was the guardian of that household, the loyal companion to the master, the paterfamilias. Its defining virtue was fides, loyalty. To seal a dog in the sack with the parricide was a piece of profound, cruel irony. It was to condemn the most disloyal of beings, a man who had betrayed the ultimate trust, to die with the very emblem of loyalty. It was a constant, living, breathing reminder of the virtue he had so spectacularly violated. Some ancient commentators suggest a darker, more primal meaning, that the dog, in its feral state, represented the blind, indiscriminate rage of the parricide's act, a bestial fury that had consumed his human reason. Either way, whether as a symbol of loyalty betrayed or of rage unleashed, the dog's presence was a judgment. Then we have the rooster. The rooster was far more than just a farm animal to the Romans. It was the herald of the dawn, the bird whose triumphant cry chased away the darkness, the terrors of the night, and the evil spirits that were thought to roam in the shadows. It was a symbol of vigilance, of the sun god's soul, and, by extension, of the sacred fire of the household hearth, which was tended by the daughters of the family and overseen by the goddess Vesta. The paterfamilias was the chief priest and guardian of this domestic light, this familial sun. By murdering his father, the parricide had metaphorically extinguished the sun of his own household. He had plunged his family into an eternal, unnatural night, forcing a rooster to die with him in the dark. Suffocating sack was a brutally literal, symbolic reenactment of his crime. He had silenced the light of his family, and now the very symbol of light would be silenced with him, its final, frantic crows unheard in the watery depths. The third animal is the snake. This is perhaps the most ancient and primal of the symbols, reaching into the deepest strata of Mediterranean belief. The snake is a chthonic creature, an animal of the earth and the underworld. In Roman domestic religion, specific, non-venomous snakes were seen as powerful and positive symbols. They were believed to be embodiments of the genius, the personal guardian spirit of the paterfamilias, or the genius loci, the spirit of the place. They were also deeply linked to the laras, the spirits of the ancestors. A snake was often kept and venerated in the home as a protector, a living link to the family's spiritual foundations. To include a snake in the sack was a damning statement. It was to say that the parasite had not just killed a man. He had attacked the very spirits of his ancestors, the foundation of his lineage. He had violated the sacred connection to the underworld and the spiritual legacy he was meant to carry on. Furthermore, the viper, a venomous snake, was a well-known symbol of evil, poison, and betrayal. The snake in the sack thus carried a powerful dual meaning. It was a symbol of the sacred piety he had desecrated, and the venomous evil that now defined his soul. He was being condemned by both the sacred and the profane aspects of the serpent. And finally, we come to the most curious, most exotic, and perhaps most debated of them all: the monkey. The monkey was not native to Italy. It was an expensive, exotic pet, a symbol of luxury and contact with the strange lands of Africa and the East. Its inclusion in the punishment is thought by many scholars to be a later addition, perhaps solidifying under the empire when such animals became more common in the menageries of the wealthy and the spectacles of the arena. The monkey's symbolism, once you understand it, is perhaps the most psychologically devastating of all. In the Roman worldview, the monkey was a grotesque caricature of a human being. It mimics human form. It mimics human action. But it lacks ratio reason and it lacks mores morality. It is a joke of a man. To seal a monkey in the sack was the ultimate, final insult from the state. It was the official declaration that the parasite was no longer considered a member of the human species. He was a twisted, broken imitation of one, a beast in human form, whose crime had stripped him of his place in the species Homo sapiens. He was a vile parody of a son, and so he would die with a parody of a man. So, let us reconstruct the reality inside that sack once more, now armed with this symbolic understanding. The darkness, the rising water, the stench of wet leather, animal fear, and human waste. The frantic, desperate struggle of 4 different creatures, each with its own instinct for survival, trapped with a man who has forfeited his own. The pecking of the rooster, a frantic protest against the enforced darkness. The biting and snarling of the dog, loyalty turned to feral terror. The cold, sinuous coiling and striking of the snake, the ancestral spirit now turned into an agent of venomous death. And the shrieking, scratching, utterly alien presence of the monkey, a constant, mocking reminder of the humanity he had lost. It is a microcosm of primordial chaos. The parasite had unleashed chaos upon the ordered world of the Roman family, and his final moments would be a chaotic symphony of the natural world turning against him, a forced reunion with the bestial nature he had so fully embraced. This was the essence of the Poena Cullei punishment that did not just kill, but one that explained, in the most visceral, unforgettable terms possible, the nature of the crime itself. The history of this unique punishment is not a straight line. Like so much of Roman history, its application waxed and waned, and its form evolved over the centuries. Its origins are shrouded in the mists of antiquity, likely predating the formal establishment of the Republic in 509 BC. It may have roots in even older pre-Roman folk traditions of dealing with those who committed unspeakable taboos. The great historian Livy alludes to it, suggesting its ancient roots as part of the Mos Maiorum. However, one of the most famous and detailed early discussions of it comes from a man who knew the Roman legal system inside and out, the celebrated orator, lawyer, and statesman Marcus Tullius Cicero. In 80 BC, Cicero, then a young and ambitious lawyer, took on a case that would make his career. It was the defense of a man named Sextus Roscius of Ameria, who was accused of the most heinous crime imaginable, murdering his own father. The case of Sextus Roscius is a gripping true crime story from the ancient world, filled with greed, political corruption, and family betrayal. The father, also named Sextus Roscius, was a wealthy and respected man. He was murdered not by his son, but by relatives who were in league with a powerful freedman of the dictator Sulla. They had the elder Roscius's name added to the prescription lists of enemies of the state, whose property could be confiscated after he was already dead. This allowed them to buy his vast estates for a pittance. To cover their tracks and eliminate the rightful heir, they accused the younger Sextus Roscius of parricide. It was a dangerous case for Cicero to take. He would have to argue against powerful allies of a dictator. But in his fiery and brilliant defense speech, the Pro Ratio Amarino, which we still have today, Cicero uses the horror of the Poena Cullei as a rhetorical weapon. He argues that the crime of parricide is so uniquely awful, so contrary to all human and divine law, that the court must demand an extraordinary level of proof before condemning a man to its unique punishment. And in doing so, he gives us a priceless insight into how the Romans themselves understood the punishment. He says this: "The ancestors who established our laws were men of such wisdom. They believed that parricide was a crime of such monstrosity that it was committed by men who were suddenly seized by a form of madness. They devised a singular punishment for it. They willed that parricides be sewn alive into a sack and cast into a river." Cicero then explains the philosophy behind it. He argues that the ancestors wanted to cut the criminal off from the world of nature. They did not want to give his body to the earth, lest the earth that produces our food be polluted by such a monster. They did not want to throw him naked into the river, lest his body, upon reaching the sea, should contaminate the very element that was used for purification rituals. They wanted to deny him the sky, the sun, the water, and the land. In Cicero's words, they wanted to ensure that he who had killed his own parent would be deprived of all the elements from which all things are said to be born. Interestingly, Cicero's account from 80 BC does not mention the full menagerie of animals. He speaks only of the man being sewn alive into a sack. This suggests that the ritual was not yet fully standardized in his time, or that the inclusion of the animals was a regional or later development. The core concept, the sack, the drowning, the total annihilation, was already firmly in place as the supreme punishment for the supreme crime. Following the turmoil of the late Republic, the punishment seems to have fallen into disuse for a period. Then came the first emperor, Augustus, who at the end of the 1st century BC embarked on a massive program of social and religious reform. He sought to restore what he saw as the lapsed traditional Roman virtues, the mos maiorum, and this included reviving ancient laws. The historian Suetonius tells us that Augustus revived the Poena Cullei, though he also records an instance where Augustus, perhaps finding the original too barbaric or theatrical for his new, more sober age, substituted a different punishment. The message, however, was clear. The crime of parricide would once again be met with extraordinary, state-sanctioned retribution. It was under later emperors, however, that the Poena Cullei reached its final, classical form. The Emperor Claudius in the mid-1st century AD is said to have used it with great frequency, perhaps enjoying its grim spectacle. And then, definitively, under the philosophically minded and legally focused Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century AD, the punishment was formally codified into Roman law with all 4 animals, the dog, the rooster, the snake, and the monkey, officially specified. This was the version that the great jurists of the High Empire, legal scholars like Ulpian and Modestinus, wrote about in their influential commentaries, cementing its place in the annals of jurisprudence. But why formalize something so gruesome? Why would an empire at the height of its power and sophistication, an empire that gave the world foundational concepts of civil law, feel the need to inscribe this dark ritual into its official codes? That is to misunderstand its function. The Poena Cullei was not just about deterrence, though it was surely meant to be a terrifying deterrent. It was a pedagogical tool. It was a story the state told about itself and its core values. It was a public lesson, more powerful than any speech, that taught every Roman citizen about the absolute sanctity of the family, the unquestionable authority of the father, and the cosmic consequences of disrupting that sacred order. It was a form of what we might today call legal terrorism, a term I use deliberately, designed to instill a deep, instinctual religious fear of committing the one crime that could, in their view, unravel their entire world. The application of this punishment was not always limited strictly to the murder of a father. There are accounts of it being applied or threatened for other crimes that were seen as analogous to parricide in their violation of sacred trust. For instance, a Vestal virgin who broke her vow of chastity, thereby polluting the sacred fire of Rome she was sworn to protect, could be condemned to be buried Olivia punishment with a similar logic of removing a polluted body from the world without shedding its blood directly. In some cases, those found guilty of high treason, an act seen as killing the patria, the fatherland, could face a similar fate. The logic was chillingly consistent. You have attacked your parent, be it your biological father or your mother country, and you must therefore be expunged from the natural world. The long, slow death of this punishment began with the rise of a new religion, Christianity. As the Christian worldview gradually supplanted Roman paganism, the moral calculus began to shift. While murder, and especially the murder of a parent, remained a grave sin, the elaborate pagan-infused symbolism of the sack, the animals, and the denial of burial clashed with developing Christian concepts of sin, repentance, the resurrection of the body, and the afterlife. The focus shifted from earthly pollution and ancestral spirits to individual salvation and eternal damnation. The Emperor Constantine, the first Christian emperor in the early 4th century AD, is credited with formally abolishing the Poena Cullei. He replaced it with other forms of execution, such as being burned alive or being thrown to wild beasts in the arena. Brutal, certainly, but lacking the intricate, ritualistic, meaning-laden horror of the sack. The New World had new ways of punishing its sinners. And yet, the ghost of the punishment lingered. The idea was too powerful to vanish completely. The law codes of the later Roman Empire, like the Code of Justinian from the 6th century, still mention it, almost as a historical curiosity, a testament to the severity of their ancestors. And fascinatingly, echoes of it resurface in some medieval Germanic law codes. These codes, centuries later and in a different cultural context, sometimes prescribe drowning in a sack, sometimes with an animal, as a punishment for particularly heinous crimes. The idea that some acts are so polluting that they require a watery grave, a total and absolute removal from the community of mankind, proved to be a powerful and enduring one. So, what are we left with when we close the book on this chapter of Roman law and contemplate the Poena Cullei? We are left with a chillingly clear window into the Roman soul. We see a society obsessed with order, hierarchy, duty, and tradition. We see a people who believed, with every fiber of their being, that the family was not a private emotional arrangement, but a sacred, quasi-religious pillar of the state. We see a legal system that was capable of not just punishment, but of profound, terrifying, symbolic storytelling. The Poena Cullei was a masterclass in psychological warfare waged by a state against its own citizens. It wasn't just about the physical pain of the whipping, the suffocation, the drowning, which was undoubtedly immense. It was about the totality of the degradation. It was a systematic assault on the body, the mind, and the spirit. It stripped the condemned of his name, his sight, his connection to the earth, his humanity, and finally, his very existence, both in this world and the next. He was not just killed. He was nullified, erased, unwritten from the book of life. It forces us to ask unsettling questions about the nature of justice itself. What is the ultimate purpose of punishment? Is it retribution for the victim? Is it deterrence for the society? Is it rehabilitation for the offender? Or is it, as the Romans believed in this most extreme of cases, a form of societal exorcism? A necessary, bloody ritual to cleanse a collective stain and restore cosmic balance? The creators and practitioners of the Poena Cullei understood something fundamental and deeply disturbing about human psychology. Our most profound fears are not always of pain, but of meaninglessness, of oblivion, the fear of being utterly alone, unheard, in the dark, the fear of being erased from the story of our people, of having our name become a curse. They weaponized this existential fear and forged it into a legal instrument of terrifying precision. In our modern world, we pride ourselves on what we believe to be a more enlightened, humane system of justice. We have, for the most part, moved beyond the overt ritualism and the grotesque symbolic brutality of the ancient world. Our punishments are sterile, clinical, hidden behind high walls, and yet the core impulses remain. We still grapple with crimes that seem to defy human comprehension. We still use language to other and dehumanize those who commit them, calling them monsters or animals. We still seek ways to express society's ultimate condemnation. The methods have changed. The stage is no longer public, but the desire to draw a firm, bright line between the human and the monstrous, and to cast the monstrous out, is a timeless one. The sack, the dog, the rooster, the snake, and the monkey have long since vanished into the dark, murky depths of the Tiber, relics of a bygone era of Roman history. They are footnotes in ancient law books, but the story they tell, the warning they embody, remains. It is a story of power, piety, and pollution. It is a testament to the terrifying creativity of a civilization defining itself by what it was willing to do to those who betrayed its most sacred and fundamental laws. And it is a stark, uncomfortable reminder that the line between order and chaos, between justice and ritualized savagery, is sometimes as thin, as porous, and as fragile as the wet leather wall of a sinking sack. I want to leave you with that image. But I also want to hear your thoughts. The sheer theatricality, the legal stagecraft of the Poena Cullei, is what has always stood out to me. It's a legal sentence that functions like a dark morality play. Of all the symbolic elements we've discussed, which one do you find the most powerful or the most chilling? Is it the quiet loyalty of the dog, a virtue betrayed? The vigilance of the rooster, a light extinguished? The ancient, ancestral power of the snake, turned into an agent of venom? Or the grotesque, mocking parody of humanity in the form of the monkey? There's no right answer. I'm genuinely curious to hear which element resonates most with your own understanding of fear and symbolism. Let me know your interpretations in the comments below. This channel is built on exploring not just the what, but the deep, often disturbing why of these dark corners of history, and your insights, your perspectives, are a crucial part of that collaborative exploration. If you found this deep dive into symbolic punishment, the psychology of fear, and the dark heart of Roman law to be a compelling journey, please consider subscribing and turning on all notifications. We have many more such journeys to take together, into the minds of those who lived before us and the systems of control they created. I would be honored to have you along for the ride. Thank you for your time and for listening.